1 out of 6 hospitality restaurant workers, by some studies, have non-compete agreements. Today, non-compete agreements apply to 1 in 5 American workers. That's 30 million workers. Amazon warehouse workers were required for a long time to sign non-compete agreements. I read a story the other day of a company called Camp Bow Wow that pays people to pet sit. They required their pet sitters to sign non-compete agreements. The reason that non-compete agreements are being used at industrial level scale today is not to protect the trade secrets of sandwich making or pet sitting. It's to keep wages down. It's to prevent low-income workers from being able to go out and get a better job and thus pressure their existing employer to increase wages. This practice has become pervasive throughout our economy, and it is a just fundamental restraint of free trade. Now, many of these non-compete agreements end up being non-enforceable. A lot of state laws don't allow you to have a non-compete agreement for a low-wage worker. But in practice, it doesn't really matter, because when that individual tries to leave and they get told they can't because of the non-compete agreement, they don't know that it's non-enforceable in state law. Or if they do know, they don't have the resources to contest the clause in a court of law. And so what do? They just end up staying. The FTC filed a complaint in January of this year against 2 Michigan-based companies that required their security guards to sign non-compete agreements prohibiting them from working for a competing business within a 100-mile radius. Despite the fact that these security guards were making very low wages, the company's non-compete included a restriction that required the employee to pay a $100,000 penalty for any alleged violation of the clause. The intention here is simply to bind the employee to the company, to give them no ability to bargain for a higher wage because they might be able to get a better wage somewhere else. There's no proprietary information that those security guards possess. What is equally interesting is that there's increasingly great data to show that there's actually no reason to have non-compete agreements, even for higher income workers. The imposition of non-compete agreements on low-wage workers is primarily about just trying to restrain wages. But the imposition of non-compete agreements on higher income workers is about impeding innovation, right? It's about a company who doesn't want competitors. And so they bind their executives to non-compete agreements such that their executives can't go work for a competing company or can't go out and start a company that may compete. And what is so maddening is that there are plenty of protections in our existing law that protect companies from intellectual property theft or patent theft. If what you're worried about is your trade secrets being appropriated by a competitor, well, then the law already protects you from that. You don't have to deny your employees or your executives the ability to go work for another company. California rightly has the reputation as probably the world center of innovation, right? More startups, more world-changing companies have come out of California than any other state, probably any other part of the world. California was the first, or one of the first in this country, to ban non-compete agreements. California decided it didn't need non-compete agreements to protect intellectual property in the state that probably has a greater interest in protecting intellectual property than any other state. No, in fact, California's economic engine is dependent on their prohibition of non-compete agreements, because by prohibiting non-compete agreements, California has a culture in which startups are encouraged, in which executives can leave one company and start another. Eric Wan was an executive at Cisco WebEx. If he wasn't working in California, he might have had a non-compete agreement applied to him, but he didn't, and so he could leave to start a company that was arguably competing with Cisco WebEx, a company called Zoom. And so, to many economists on the right and the left, this is becoming a no-brainer. Non-compete agreements are bad for wage growth. Non-compete agreements are bad for innovation. Non-compete agreements are bad for low-income workers. Non-compete agreements are bad for high-income workers. And so today, I'm on the floor to talk about what the data tells us about non-compete agreements as a means to encourage my colleagues to take a look at a piece of legislation that we are introducing today, the Workforce Mobility Act. It's a pretty simple piece of legislation that would ban the use of non-compete agreements for both high-income and low-income workers. And it is a bipartisan piece of legislation. Senator Todd Young, Senator Kevin Cramer, Senator Tim Kaine, and myself are introducing this bill today. I don't know that there's another policy that the four of us can find common ground on, but we find common ground on this issue because maybe if you're a progressive, you come to this issue through the rights of workers and boosting their wages. If you're a conservative, you come to this issue through the restraint on free trade that exists through the perpetuation of non-compete agreements. But all across America, this is a pretty bipartisan issue. And here in the Senate, it is bipartisan as well. I am glad that the FTC just a week or so ago announced that they were going to undertake a rule to ban non-compete agreements. I congratulate the Biden administration and the FTC for taking a leadership role. And it may be that that rule, once it's adopted and in place, will do the work of this legislation. But we know that rules are only as good as the commitment of one particular administration. And so my hope and my recommendation is that no matter what the FTC does when it comes to restrictions on non-compete agreements, that we pass the Workforce Mobility Act, that we provide a guarantee in the law that non-compete agreements are not going to stand in the way of wages rising or small businesses starting. There's a lot of public support out there. 92% of voters think that it's way too hard today to start or grow a new business. 80% of voters, again, across party lines, support policies that allow people who want to start a new business more freedom by reducing the restrictions that come when you try to venture out on your own. And increasingly, one of the primary restrictions that exists on people who want to start a new business, who want to become entrepreneurs, are these non-compete agreements.